Welcome, everybody. Looks like we have a nice crowd this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, depending on where you're coming from. Um, just going to give about 1 minute just to get a few more folks in. And it looks like everyone's already having their camera off and they're muted, so that is great. All right. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Color Literacy Forum number 11. I'm Luann Stovall, a member of the Color Literacy Project team and host of the Color Literacy Forums. The forums offer a platform to share innovative content, teaching methods, and resources to expand 21st century color education at the university level across all disciplines, from art and design to humanities and the sciences. This project is a joint collaboration of the Color Literacy Project in partnership with the International Color Association, the Inter-Society Color Council, and Cumulus, the leading global association of art and design research. So before we jump in, please let us know who you are by putting your name, where you're joining us from, your university or place of work in the chat box. An active chat box is highly encouraged in our forum, so please keep your fingers warmed up for comments and questions also. We would like to hear from everyone, so please make sure and let us know who you are because we are all in this color community together. So thank you so much. This is the first forum in our 2025 series titled Facts and Myths About Color. Today's forum will introduce the series and delve into some of the deeply entrenched and widespread misconceptions about color found in textbooks, popular articles, magazines, and throughout the internet. While the Color Literacy Project has previously addressed some of these myths, the 4 forums in this series will take us on a deeper dive with insights from experts across various disciplines. The discussions will address several key topics, starting with today's focus on the limitations of traditional color theory, exploring how outdated models continue to shape education and why a new approach is needed. The theme of Forum 12 will be for 11 will be the misconceptions about the idea of traditional color theory. And we're going to move on to the color attributes in the next forum, and harmony and meaning, addressing the limitations of a simple color wheel to describe the relationships of color and how a hue paradigm falls short, and the complexity of color symbolism and its psychological effects, the misconceptions around that. The next forum will shine light on the myths of color mixing, why the idea that colors can be mixed in a straightforward way is misleading, and how comparative mixing provides a more accurate perspective. The final forum will complete the series by challenging the perception of color as merely an aesthetic addition, instead highlighting its deeper communicative, functional, and psychological roles. Before I introduce our speakers, let's review the timeline for you all. Today's forum is 90 minutes long, divided into 2 parts. Part 1 is an hour long. We have 2 speakers today. Each speaker will give approximately 25-minute presentation. You're encouraged to type your comments and questions in the chat box during the presentations. But rather than take the questions after each talk, we will have a moderated panel discussion with the speakers in part 2 of the program. And that'll be from Eastern Time, 12 noon to 12:30. At that point, your questions and comments will be addressed during this session. So please get your questions ready for that. And now I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Talk 1, Color Misconceptions, and especially focused on their impact in the classroom, by Andreas Schwarz. Since 1998, Andreas has been a teacher of art and English at the Municipal Girls' School in Essen-Bordeck in Germany. From 2015 to 2021, he served as a private lecturer for art education at the University of Duisburg-Essen. He's a member of the Association for Art Education, NRW, and a member of the Color Literacy Project team. Andreas's research focuses on the didactics and methodology of color in the art classes, the history of color in art education, the cultural history of colors, the history and theory of color systems, and the history of doctrines of color harmony. He's an author of several color articles and books, such as, I'm going to give you the English translation. You don't want to hear my attempt to speak German. So it's Color Competence, Orientation Aids for Didactics for Dealing with Color in Art Teaching, published in 2022. So without further ado, please welcome Andreas Schwarz.
Okay. So,
Looking good.
wait a minute. Oh, it's the wrong one. Wait. Sorry. It's
Yep. That's perfect, Andreas.
okay.
Yep. Thank
Yeah,
you.
then. Okay. Welcome to my presentation, in which I would like to offer some insights into what happens when the traditional color theory is applied in arts lessons at school. You must not forget that this is a space where almost all children get very early in contact with this theory, quite early and maybe for the first time. The relationship between teaching color and color theory in this context of art has always been a problematic one and was by no means love at first sight. For example, already Newton's theory of color was perceived as a rival and was rejected by many art teachers, including the renowned Guido Schreiber, who wrote in 1968, "The greatest and forever admired colorists lived long before Newton wrote his optics." And although color had hardly played a role in drawing lessons until the beginning of the 20th century due to the predominance of drawing, the few color theory works in circulation and even less experience with it were enough to officially advise against it. This is stated in the new regulations on drawing lessons in Prussia from 1904, where it says, "For the development of the sense of color, the theoretical discussions of color mixtures and color combinations on the basis of the color wheel is of little value and may even be harmful." That was over a century ago now, and despite many warnings and negative judgments from experienced and sensible teachers, the traditional color theory has nevertheless held its ground and is more present today than ever. The reasons for the widespread use of color theory in the classroom will ultimately never be fully clarified. But what has been clarified for the first time in a well-founded scientific study is the impact of color theory as a teaching subject on students and teachers. This qualitative empirical study is based on expert interviews with teacher trainers and on participant observations of art lessons at different types of schools and age groups. The evaluation was carried out using phenomenological reduction in order to gain generally valid results. Before I come to some of the results generated in this way, I will provide two brief insights into the survey phase of the study, which was carried out from 2010 to 2016. These are two illustrative examples of daily teaching reality with exemplary character. The first example is an introduction lesson on the subject of color in the 5th grade of a German comprehensive school. So the children are 10 or 11 years old. The art teacher, who had previously chosen the primary colors from the paint box by just looking into it, and instead of yellow, magenta, and cyan, she chose yellow, magenta, and ultramarine, which is a charming, but in this context meaningless color theory mix. She announces color as the new topic for the following weeks. The reaction of the students, everyone cheers. There's a great enthusiasm in the classroom. The teacher asks, "What colors do you know?" All hands go up, still enthusiastically, and numerous color names are shouted out, from familiar ones to imaginative ones, like bottle green, cherry red, or just red, orange, and so on. The teacher listens to almost all of them, and after enough have been named, she writes exactly 6 of them on the blackboard. You may guess which. Yes, you're right. These 6, which are immediately divided into primary and secondary colors, which is illustrated with colored cardboard. So, all of a sudden, the subject of color has turned into the subject of color theory. And the pupils are very quiet now because they don't know what's happening to them so quickly. Into this quietness, the teacher briefly explains color theory and then asks, "So, which colors can be mixed?" A girl raises her hand and answers according to her experience. "Well, you can mix all colors." This triggers a strong reaction from the teacher, who denies it loudly and firmly, saying, "No, you can't." The class is completely silent now, and the way is finally paved for color theory. Then the teacher announces the first task. We are going to draw a color snake. The pupils imagine beautiful and colorful snakes, and the first tentative interest is awakened again. However, the teacher shows on the board exactly what the snake should look like. The pupil's question, "May the snake also have a head and a tail?" is answered with, "Maybe later." The pupils are only allowed to decide which color they want to start with when coloring the snake according to color theory. First, red is named, then purple, then blue, and then the list stops. The teacher is surprised, waits, and finally leaves the square free, and then fills the next one with yellow. The pupils immediately call orange, and finally also green, simply because it was left over. But why so late and not straight away? The reason is simple. The pupils do not judge colors theoretically, but based on their perception and sense of color, and on that you can rely. Unlike the so-called secondary colors, violet and orange, green has no phenomenal similarity to the primary colors yellow and blue, because it is itself a primary color, and a real one, not in terms of paints, but on a psychological level. You don't need to teach this to children because they sense it intuitively. Now it was time to mix the color snake, whereby only the 3 primaries, ultramarine, magenta, and yellow, quotation, may come into contact with water. In some cases, the pupils were guided again by visual models, here by the green paints, for instance, or it was just stubbornly mixed according to color theory, and no matter which green resulted, and you can see the greens are quite different here, the task was accomplished. Afterwards, the Itten color wheel was also mixed, and a student came to me, because I turned out to be an interested researcher, and showed me her sheet and asked, "Do you think I mixed this violet?" And I said, "Well, why not?" And the girl, "Because it looks exactly like the real violet in the paint box." This little encounter is rather revealing because it shows that pupils are good observers and also compare and judge colors. Above all, however, it reveals that mixing is perceived here as an artificial process, as it produces colors that only in exceptional cases, as here with the violet, come close to the real colors in the paint box. The series was continued with painting autumn leaves, where, despite a rich selection of color material in the paint boxes, it was only allowed to mix with the three primaries. However, that didn't work, because the appeal of the colors in the box was so great. And so more and more pupils also used other paints, which annoyed the obedient pupils and led to discussions between pupils and between pupils and teacher. The students also realized very quickly that the teacher could not judge by the mixing results which starting materials had been used. So the teacher had to make more and more concessions as the series progressed. So she first allowed brown and later added black, until after several lessons, she finally announced, clearly annoyed and resigned, "You are now allowed to use all colors of your paint box, just as long as you mix them." What a waste of time, because this is what she could have had at the very beginning without any color theory. The second example is taking from another comprehensive school in grade 11, with the pupils being around 16 years old. It was also the first lesson of a sequence on color, which started with elaborately prepared learning stations on color theory, all very science and physics oriented, including a prism experiment, color wheel mixing, and additive light mixing using color transparencies, which in theory and decent material given would produce white, but not in this case, as you can see. 3 students switch on the projectors, adjust them, and start discussing very emotionally, which arouses the curiosity of the researcher, who comes over and asks what's going on. Jana, one of the girls, replies somewhat hesitantly at first, "Well, it's whitish, such a light shade." And Ina, on the other hand, says quite firmly, "No, I don't see that." To which Jana replies, "But that's what we learned in physics." And Ina counters, "Yes, but I've never seen it before there either." Now Agnes, the third girl, intervenes and asks cautiously, "Well, what do we want to write down now?" In the meantime, the teacher is back with the group and explains that it should theoretically be white, but that the transparencies are not all the same thickness, and in addition, one transparency had broken and he hadn't been able to find a suitable replacement. But even with the original set of transparencies from a collection of teaching materials, it wouldn't have worked completely. Having heard this explanation, Agnes notes that the 3 colors together make white. Here, the teacher's expectations are met. This means, in this case, theory is placed above one's own perception and experience. The sad thing here is that students like Ina, who rely on their perception and confidently stand by what they actually see, lose out in this system. Unfortunately, Ina is no exception. Even in kindergarten, children are trained to learn what they should see and not what they really can see. No, none of these children could see white when spinning here, nor even a color that is close to it. That's simply impossible. But it was written down as a result of their own experiences. And this is no exception when teachers make use of color theory. The physical view, to which Itten's variant also belongs, can still be found in elementary schools with proudly presented color circles, which you can see here on the left, or up to the compact theory variant with color circles and color contrasts as a blackboard inscription in the upper secondary school. These were some examples which add to the results of the study mentioned before. So, in a brief conclusion, the following aspects, among others, can be identified as the didactic problem potential of the traditional color theory, which means the phenomenon of color is being reduced to a theoretical construct. Abstract terms like primary, secondary, complementary colors, and so on have no objective meaning for the students, which means traditional color theory does not have a connection to the students' everyday experience. Traditional color theory is an external standard that is applied to the phenomenon and does not do it justice. And it always goes hand in hand with deductive and extrinsically motivated teaching, which goes again along with a lack of interest among the students, a lack of sustainability, and avoidance strategies. And it can finally result in possible conflicts between teachers and pupils, but also between pupils themselves. And so, what the art educator Victor de Amico already stated in 1942 still hits the point when he says, the teaching of the theory of color by means of the color wheel, color harmonies and scales as an end in itself is of very doubtful value in art education, and the progressive teacher has abandoned this method as harmful since it tends to inhibit the use of color rather than to develop color consciousness. The reason is that it does not depend on visual experience but on logic. The memory and not the emotions control the process. It's like giving a child the answer to a problem and then asking him to work it out. The zest has been taken out of the experience because the child already knows the answer. Most teaching of this type is merely memorization and not actual experience. In color, as in any other form of expression, the personal and unexpected are to be prized. They distinguish the individual response from the commonplace and the unusual from the average. This remarkable statement, which was made almost 2 decades before Itten published his color theory version, is still valid today and in full accordance with the recently carried out qualitative empirical study. This all sounds very depressing, and in fact it is. But I don't want to leave you behind with these impressions. And that's why I'm going to end my presentation with a positive outlook. The questions for most teachers who look for alternatives is, how do I teach color without traditional color theory? The good news is that at least when it comes to arts lessons, children with a fine sense of color, their pronounced color perception, and their joy of experimentation do almost all the work for us teachers. All we have to do is give children and young people the freedom they need and encourage their abilities instead of ignoring or even suppressing them. So I'll present the last example, which refers to paint mixing, actually one of the standard applications of traditional color theory in arts lessons. But as the example will show you, it can work without color theory, and that even better. When it comes to color, art teachers always want to bring their students to mixing. The question is, however, how and why? Here, the starting point for the pupils of a sixth form grammar school class was an August Macke painting reproduced as a large format calendar page. This was cut up and the pieces were raffled off, which already raised a certain degree of excitement for the 12-year-old students. The task was now to get inspired by this section of the picture, to create your own design, and then to integrate this original section into your own picture in such a way that it is no longer visible or does not stand out recognizably from it. And what do you think interested the students most about this section of the picture they got? No, it wasn't the color. The image detail primarily served as a trigger and projection surface for their own ideas and fantasies, which are initially to be found in the areas of motifs and shapes. Color was only perceived as a secondary priority. But then it quickly became clear that a lot of effort was needed to integrate this section properly. So careful observation and mixing became necessary. And how did that work? In the same way that color-sensitive artists have always worked, namely by looking closely, constantly comparing, evaluating, in this case also together with fellow students, and experimenting a lot. The results are quite impressive. Remember the pieces here? And this is what the students made out of them. And here you can see that self-efficiency, nuances, richness of differentiation, experimentation, creativity, imagination, perceiving colors and color effects, judging colors, and the cultural aspect was also not neglected because now the students were curious about who they owned their picture to, which also included the motivation to get to know the artist and the work in more detail. So you can see that learning to see and trusting your own perception, walk through the world with open eyes, is an important skill for art lessons, for which art lessons can lay the foundations. And what a difference is this to teaching a color theory where the mixing results only in rough categories and nuances don't matter, not to mention the aspects of lacking observation and motivation which goes along with it. Some years ago, a bunch of so-called color experts got together to end this misery. All these people came from different backgrounds and from different parts of the world, but share one vision: to create and spread a new approach of teaching color, which does not contradict modern science. After many, and most of all very fertile discussions, and a good deal of work, the start has been successfully made. And now the Color Literacy Project, which I of course talk about, goes into its second phase, of which these presentations today are part of. This is basically good news. But it will be exciting to see whether the art teaching community will accept this and whether color literacy will prevail over the supposedly easier to teach color theory in the future. It's up to you to help to ensure that the Color Literacy Project will turn into a color literacy movement. Thanks a lot for listening.
Wow. Andreas, thank you so much for giving this presentation. I just feel like what you have done is a number of things here, but addressing the proverbial elephant in the room, and by the room, I think we mean the classroom, and what that really, how that really impacts us and where we can go. So I have a feeling that during our panel discussion, there's going to be a lot of questions, which is going to be great. So again, thank you so much for that. And one other thing is, I'd just like to know where to get that color halo that he was wearing. That was pretty awesome. So thank you so much. So following Andreas is our second talk, and this is Color Misconceptions by speaker Robert Hirschler. Robert focus will be a historical perspective on enduring color misconceptions that have shaped teaching practices for centuries. Robert graduated at the Technical University of Budapest in chemical engineering and textile chemistry. In 1967, he presented his first paper on computerized color matching and has been involved in colorimetry and color science ever since. He has been involved in the International Color Association, that is the AIC acronym that you hear us talking about, for over 50 years since his participation at the second AIC Congress in 1973. He's an active member of both Procor in Brazil and the Hungarian National Color Committee, and a past member of the AIC Executive Committee. In 2010 to 2024, he was the co-chair of the study group on color education and the co-chair of the ISCC AIC Color Literacy Project from 2019 to 2024. Robert's current research interests include the teaching of basics of color science to architects, artists, and designers, as explained in his color research and application article, How Much Color Science is Not Too Much, and the color theory of neo-impressionist painters. Without further ado, please welcome Robert Hirschler.
Thank you, Lynn. I will just share my screen.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so having heard from Andreas that sticking to traditional color theory is inhibiting children and young students to use their creativity, let's have a look at the greater picture, because color misconceptions are not problematic only in art lessons, but also in design, architecture, and all other fields. Where do they come from and what are they? Well, if you go to the color literacy website, you can see a list of color misconceptions of different kinds, and please do so and read about them. Today I will only speak about 4 of them, which are all over, even unfortunately in modern books on color, books for artists and books for designers and books for architects. So let's see one by one these very common color misconceptions. Number 1 is that all colors can be mixed using a primary set of 3. Well, this notion comes from 1664, so it's not a new idea. It was Robert Boyle who first formulated that a few simple and primary colors, and he mentioned white and black, and what we now know, red, blue, and yellow, as the primary colors, from which you can mix all the hues, you can imitate the hues. But he already warned that you not always can imitate the splendor or the vividness or the brightness of all colors. So even then, he knew that 3 primary colors cannot really result in all the colors. And about 50 years later, in 1708, a lovely little booklet was published on the painting of miniature and the painting of pastel. And in this book, the author, who is supposed to be, or at least this book is attributed to Boutte, he said, there are properly only 3 primitive colors, which cannot be composed by other colors, but of which all the others can be composed. And this definition of primitive colors, primary colors, is with us, unfortunately, even today. And one of the reasons that it's so widespread is that Johannes Itten published his amazing book, The Art of Color, in 1961. Strangely enough, Itten himself never defined what are primary colors. This definition is just missing from his book. But he said that to construct this beautiful color wheel, you need 3 primary colors, red, blue, and yellow. And the red that is neither bluish nor yellowish a yellow that is neither greenish nor reddish, and a blue that is neither greenish nor reddish. Well, if you take these three primary paints, you cannot mix colors, but you can mix paints, you will never get this color wheel. And another little point, he is talking about three primary colors. But to explain his three colors, he uses four. As Andreas has already mentioned, green is also a primary color in the psychological sense. So when you say three primary colors, you mean at least four. And if we analyze Eaton's book with a spectrophotometer or with microscope, you can easily see that his color wheel was not constructed by three primary colors. His primaries, the red, yellow, and blue, are spot colors. And the secondaries are other spot colors, probably. And what he calls tertiaries are simply four-color prints, offset prints, based on CMYK. So why talk about red, yellow, and blue primary colors? In the end of the 19th century, Parkhurst already mentioned that we must have at least two of each of these three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. Oh, wait a minute. So there are now three primary colors twice. We have six primary colors. And this idea, of course, has been brought over in the 20th century. And there came the double primaries palette and the split primary color palette and all this. And many textbooks use this concept of using, instead of three primary colors, twice three primary colors. Yellowish red and a bluish red. Reddish blue and a greenish blue. A greenish yellow and a reddish yellow. Quite contrary to what Eaton was teaching us. Well, this helps somewhat. But the question is, if you cannot use three primary colors, you can use six primary colors, but why not use more primary colors? And painters, of course, do not use primary colors. Painters use, just like Andreas's children in the classroom, any color which is in the paint box or their mixtures. So Callan in 1988 analyzed Cézanne's painting. Actually, she had analyzed many paintings. In this particular case, Cézanne was using 15 paints to create this painting. No talk of primary colors here. So to conclude this first misconception, let's again make it clear. You cannot mix colors. Color is a perception. You can mix lights, you can mix paints, you can mix inks, and so on. And the modern view is that all colors cannot be produced by any combination of any three or four or even more components, primary paints, primary inks, primary lights, and so on. Well, this is the CIE color diagram showing the chromaticity diagram, showing the limits of all possible colors, which the average human eye can see. And here are the limits, the gamuts, that can be created by primary colors, primary lights, normally red, green, and blue, but even the best red, green, and blue primary colors can give you a very limited gamut as compared to the totality. And the case of prints, CMYK primaries, are even more limited. So even in practice, we are bound to have limitations because of economics. We cannot use unlimited number of pins in a printing machine or on a screen. But if you need high color fidelity, even screens are nowadays using 4 or more phosphors, and printers can use 6 or more primary inks to get better color reproduction. So to conclude, to produce all colors, we need all hundreds or even thousands of, quoting Newton, colors of the spectrum. He meant, of course, the monochromatic lights, which are the boundaries of all perceivable colors. And if we mix all of them, then we get really all the colors that we can see. So the fundamental stimuli are the monochromatic lights, either when we speak about lights or when we speak about reflected lights. So, misconception number 2, a single simple hue circle or color wheel is all that is needed to illustrate all color relationships. Well, is it all that we need? First question, which color wheel? In 2020, the Color Literacy Project initiated a survey among teachers of color. And for that survey, we used 7 different color wheels based on different sets of primaries: yellow, red, blue, double yellow, red, blue, CMY, RGB, a mixture of RGB and CMY, and 2 perceptual color wheels, the NCS and the Munsell. Question is, why do I need a color wheel? What do I want to do with it? What do I want to show? Do I want to show how to mix primary colors? Well, it's suggested that you may use the yellow, red, blue color wheel, or the yellow, magenta, cyan color wheel, which is better, of course, it works much better in practice, or the double primary color wheel. If you want to show light mixing, you can use the red, green, blue color wheel. If you want to use additive and subtractive mixing together, which is a strange thing to illustrate in the same color wheel, but then you might want to use the yellow, magenta, cyan, red, green, blue color wheel. If you want to illustrate perceptual relationships, you might go for Munsell or NCS, but here we will see that it must be in 3 dimensions. Or do you want to show complementary colors on the color wheel? Which color wheel? Because every color wheel will yield a different pair of complementary colors. Or do I want to find good color combinations or show them on the color wheel? We shall see how it doesn't work. Well, as early as 1758, Tobias Mayer already realized that a simple color wheel, in his case, a color triangle, is not enough. You need to extend it to the lighter colors by mixing with white the paints, and darker colors by mixing with black. So this was the first hint of a 3-dimensional colored space. Munsell, in 1905, came up with the idea of the color sphere, based, of course, on Runge's 1810 color sphere. But Munsell realized a few years later that no regular contour will serve as an illustration of the color solid. So in 1915, he created the irregular Munsell color tree. He said that were all pigment colors of equal chroma, then a sphere would be present, an ideal of their relations. But pigments are very unequal in strength. Yellow, a high chroma yellow has high lightness. A high chroma blue or purple blue has low lightness. So the color body will be very irregular. So the modern view is that to represent colors of lights or objects, we require a three-dimensional framework. And different frameworks based on different three-dimensional quantities, hue, lightness, and saturation or chroma, or hue, white content, black content, first case Mansell, the second case the NCS model, or any other model. Depending on the use, you need different three-dimensional frameworks. But you need at least 3 dimensions to illustrate all colors. You can find some models on the Color Literacy Project website. And these models were created by Maggie Maggio. And she has created 3D models which you can download, print out for yourself, and create your own 3D models from the Color Literacy Project website. Misconception number 3. There are simple rules that guarantee color harmony. Are there? Well, the first book on color harmony goes back again to the late 18th century. Hoffman published his book on the harmony of colors. And he said that harmony is the agreement of the real varieties in a certain whole. Well, yes. Are there any rules to this agreement? Well, many authors, particularly in the 20th century, thought there are very good rules to create color harmonies. MacDonald even constructed an ingenious calibrator to show, in this case, alternate colors with one major component. And these selections are supposed to be harmonious. The book is interesting because it's very outdated, and we can see that in 70 years, color harmony ideas are completely different from the 1940s to the 2025. But MacDonald himself, author of the book on color harmony, said, "There are no absolute rules for color harmony." And this from the author of the book on color harmony. Eaton also shows triadic and tetradic and whatnot color combinations on his color wheel. Are these color combinations which you like? Would you like a printed shirt or your curtain with these colors? Well, it depends, maybe. But in the classroom, Eaton himself said it was realized with astonishment, that's Eaton's astonishment, that each student had his own conception of color harmony. So it's okay that we give rules about color harmony, but everybody has his or her own conception of color harmony, said Eaton. So, misconception number 3 is also questionable. Andreas Schwarz wrote a very detailed book on color harmony studies, unfortunately only available in German. But the modern view is that this is a highly complex subject, which is still open to debate and controversy. In scientific circles, it's maintained that harmony is individual and subjective, and there are no valid rules to establish harmonious combinations. Misconception number 4. Colors have universal symbolic meanings. Using color categories or simple hue names are sufficient to attach meaning and effect to colors. Like, saying that red is an arousing color and blue is a calming color. Well, many books deal with color preferences. One of the relatively recent books from 2000 by Eva Heller, which was published in several editions in German and translated into Portuguese and translated into Spanish and even Chinese, but not into English. And she, like so many other authors, gave a ranking. Blue is the most popular color, and green is the next most preferred color, and red is the third. According to some other authors, red is the second and green is the third. But again, this is too general. And going back again to the 1930s, Chandler said, "There is little to be learned by collecting bare judgments of pleasantness without reference to the total experience evoked by color." You cannot say that my color preference is red. Well, it depends on what context. Color is contextual. The same red in a certain combination may be pleasing, and in another combination may not be pleasing. And which red? And another widely distributed question: what are the psychological implications of color preferences? If your preferred color is red, then you are such and such psychological type. There is the Hirschler color test, which is very well known, checking your personality by ranking some colors according to your preference. And that is supposed to give you a description of your personality. A modern one, still on the web, color personality test. Again, telling you that if you like this color, you are a trustful person, or it represents disgust or surprise. Well, these color preferences appear effective because of the Barnum effect. And Barnum, you may know, was the Prince of Humbug in the 19th century. He was the founder of the Barnum and Bailey Circus. And these tests appear effective because the results would fit almost anyone. They are so vague and so general. And people think that, oh, it fits me, so this is very good. But it would fit many other people with many other characteristics. Ellen Divers studied the affective response to color, and she suggested to change from the hue paradigm, when you say that red is this and blue is that, to go into details, which red and which blue. So she suggested the value chroma paradigm. And she is quoting studies by Wilms and Oberfeld, who studied the arousal effect of different hues, gray, blue, green, red. And this blue, which is a relatively bright blue, very high chroma blue, is more arousing, according to research, than this red, which is muted, which is a medium chroma red. So when you say red is arousing and blue is calming, you must add which red and which blue. And also Divers refers to research by Valdez and Mehrabian. And she shows that these effective responses are more related to chroma and lightness than to the hue itself. And within the same hue family, you have areas, pleasure and higher arousal for higher chroma and higher dominance for lower lightness. Very interesting publications. So the modern view concerning the universal symbolic meaning of colors and simply hue names is that this is also a highly complex subject, open to debate and controversy. And in addition to the hue dimension, the other color attributes, such as value and chroma, are similar, and their combinations also play often an even more significant role. So we may conclude saying that traditional color theory, and we must emphasize that this is what is being taught in many cases. It's not against theory as such. We are talking about traditional color theory, or rather, its various manifestations. I've listed 4 of them. These are parts of traditional color theory, but let's make it clear that there is no such thing as color theory. There are parts and different aspects, but there is no universal color theory. And these manifestations owe their popularity to being vague, simple, and easy to explain. Unfortunately, this simplification makes the theory inaccurate and very often laden with misconceptions. And worst of all, these are widely taught and publicized, even today. Look at textbooks recently published or the internet. Andreas has reported on decades of intensive work on the use of color in art lessons, which reveal serious deficiencies that urgently require fundamental rethinking in this field. And these deficiencies are deeply and firmly rooted in the tradition of the subject and virtually dominated by traditional color theory. To end on a happy note, in the 21st century, color education should break away from the shackles of traditional color theory and treat color as something to be experienced, explored, enjoyed, and not just taught. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Robert. For both you and Andreas, ending on a happy note. I think that many of us share what you're saying, the opportunity to breathe new life into this, the way we learn about color, which is so exciting. And I just want to, you mentioned the Luther personality test. When we were working on this forum, I had mentioned, I just thought I should just say this. I took that test and I found out that according to that test, I am a perverted psychopath. So because I like grays and browns, so whatever. That's what I'm happy for the updates. So I want to go ahead and move into our next part, the part 2 of our forum. This is our panel discussion. So we're going to turn the cameras on for Robert and Andreas. And the moderator for the program today is Harold Arnkel. He is an artist, educator, and author of the book Colors in the Visual World, which is a wonderful book. You should definitely look that up. And he's also a member of the Color Literacy Project team. The other person who's going to be with us in this discussion is Ingrid Calvo-Ivanovic. She is a fellow member of the Color Literacy Project, and she will be monitoring your questions from the chat box. So everybody get your questions ready, and without further ado, let's begin part 2.
Okay, thanks very much, Robert and Andreas, for your really insightful, fascinating talks. Lots of questions, I'm sure, crop up in our minds, in the minds of the audience, and please put them in the chat box, and Luan Luan and Ingrid will hand them over to our speakers. I have one question at just to start off with. Andreas, you said that the subject of colors in the classroom, the subject of colors turns into the subject of color theory. I really like this quote. Well, could you explain a little bit further what is the difference between the subject of color and the subject of color theory?
Well, the aspects of color in arts lessons actually touches lots of aspects. It can be just the expression of color, it can be symbolism of color, it can be cultural aspects, it can be having what individual colors do artists use, and so on and so on. But as soon as when it comes to color in a more closer sense, and when I, as the researcher, asked teachers if I could see how they teach color, I didn't know what expected me. It could have been anything, but all I was shown was color theory. So when it comes in the closest terms to color in the classroom, color theory is actually meant and referred to.
So the subject of color is a much wider field.
Of course, yeah.
Consisting of, as you said, cultural aspects and psychological and technological,
Individual use of
technical
colors
aspects.
by artists and so on, yeah.
So what we're saying here is that there is no single overarching theory that will explain all the uses and all the applications of color.
No. And especially when you think of the first example I showed when the teacher was announcing the topic of color, the children certainly didn't have color theory in mind. They expected everything else but not color theory. But this was what happened in an instant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Robert, I'm wondering about well the primary colors, which seems to be a kind of eternal sort of ground for teaching color today in at the early stages, and even later on in higher education. Even you return over and over again to this idea that there are primary colors, and that that the set of three is a kind of given, and that the sort of theoretical aspects of color kind of branch out from this magical set of three primary colors. Now, if you take that away, and you say that there can be four, like in the in the CMYK printing process, or different four in the in the NCS system, or five in the Mansell system, and so on. So aren't we left with just confusion theoretically? I mean, what do you say to the people who say that what do we have left? What do we have left?
Well, the problem is that if you say primary colors, it would imply that these colors are somehow very different from all the others. Now, when you say colors, you should think about a psychological something. And yes, in psychology and in color vision, we can speak about four primary colors because our color vision is based somehow, or we interpret colors in the kind of yellow, blue, red, green primary space, color space, psychological color space. The problem is that in practice and in textbooks, it's all mixed up. People start speaking about primary colors, then they say we mix them. What they mean, of course, that we mix paints or lights or inks, and you have to differentiate it. And as I mentioned briefly, yes, in technology, well, our world is very colorful. And in the 21st century, color is all around us, and we produce colors in a number of different ways. But if you produce it on a screen, you get away with red, green, and blue phosphors in most of the cases. Not always, but most of the cases. You buy a monitor, you buy a cell phone, you buy a TV set. It's based on 3 additive primaries, 3 lights, primary lights, which give you an amazing range of colors because they are seen in context.
In contrast to each other.
In contrast to each other, and you don't have a black phosphor on your television. You see black because there are other lights which are brighter. The same with printing. In printing, with lights, it's a little bit easier. With printing, CMY primary inks are okay for a good many things. But if you want really high quality printing, Eaton took the trouble when he produced his absolutely amazing, beautiful art of color. It took the trouble to have each of the color plates printed 20-some different colors were used for the printing of that book. Not 3 primaries.
Yeah, the original edition.
The original, the 1961 edition.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But you cannot get away with 3 colors if you want extremely high quality. In the textile industry, of course, well, I was learning textile chemistry at university. We were told you could build a colored triangle, 3 primaries. But in the industry, you use 6, 8, 12 dyestuffs or pigments at least to get a reasonable gamut.
Yeah. So it's just it's a technological matter, a matter of using the least possible colors to get the most out of them.
Well, you always want the most economic solution with the acceptable result.
Yep. You also mentioned briefly that there's no consensus about what is color harmony. I'm just wondering about this is a subject that interests me quite a bit. If there's no consensus about, well, when we're talking about, I mean, what do we talk about when we talk about color harmony? It's difficult to say really because it's really borrowed from music and from poetry and so on. This concept, but if we agree that when people talk about color harmony, they probably mean something about the way colors are juxtaposed and fit together in a composition that seems pleasant or balanced. So if there is no consensus about that, no theory can be built around that, how do you explain the sort of aesthetics of color and well, the beauty of colors or the use of color in art and design to make them look attractive or more saleable? So
to quote a cliche, color is in the eye of the beholder. The beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You look at something which you may like. You may not be able to explain why you like it. You may not be explained why you like some kind of music, and some people like this kind of music or that kind of music. Harmony is something which is pleasing to you, and it may not be pleasing to other people.
Well, how do you communicate with colors then? How do you communicate this balance of beauty or harmony or pleasantness?
You project your inner harmony. And if you are a great artist, then a vast majority of people will like what you are projecting. But if you are a great artist and want to do something which you think is interesting, and then you paint sunrise, you happen to be Monet, and there comes the critic and says, this is ugly, this is horrible. And the whole impressionist movement created beauty which we now accept as beauty and harmony. And back in 1872, the public and the critics were laughing at it and said, this is not beauty, this is not harmony, this is disgrace. So, you know, if you are a great artist, then many people will like what you do.
But it's not necessarily based on any universal concept of
It
fitting colors
definitely is
together
not-
in a harmonious way.
It definitely is not based on a universal concept, because there is no universal concept.
If there
Andreas,
was
do you have,
one,
you have some
everything
comment on
would look alike here because there are just simple rules and all houses would look the same, all cities would look the same, all pictures would look the same. So, and that doesn't work, okay? And you can see it by a good example. One concept of color harmony was to assign colors to musical tones. And there are just as many different assignments as colors exist. So you find a C assigned to a red, to a blue, to a green, and it depends just on the author. As I would put it, there is a kind of individual taste everyone has, and it's a kind of cultural thing you get used to when you grow up in different areas. And so it's a kind of mixture of personal and cultural taste. And many people use this insecurity or the lacking standards or rules by just telling people, well, which colors will be the fashionable ones for next year. The industry does that. Okay, they use the insecurity of the people, of the people's color taste, because many don't dare to use bright colors. They paint their houses just in gray, white, because they don't. They have never been trained to cope with colors in that respect. So the industry has it quite easy to tell them what to use, which colored cars they have to buy, and so on. And they can set up rules or fashionable colors for each year. So as a kind of getting the consuming system going.
Yes, and it's a long process from from deciding the kind of fashionable colors for 3 years onwards, because you have to get the whole industrial chain going from getting the correct palettes, and then the material, for example, in the textile industry or the clothing industry. It's a long process before those decisions actually become the so-called fashionable colors at the end. So it's actually decided beforehand, a long time before the market actually they reach the market. But that's a whole different discussion, I guess.
Yeah,
Ingrid,
but if there were universal rules, such a kind of marketing tool wouldn't exist.
yeah, quite. Yeah, you wouldn't need it. Ingrid, are there questions from the audience?
Yeah, we have some questions from the audience. The first is a question from Ana Rezende, where she's trying to, I think with her question, she's trying to build a bridge between what Andreas showed to us on the primary or school education and what happens then when it's related to post-secondary or university. So In this case, her question relates to what do you, both of you, the speakers and the panel, suggest for as a strategy for starting teaching color to students in design courses at the university level who were already wrongly educated during their childhood and adolescence, so they may carry a lot of misconceptions with them. So what do you suggest to break with those misconceptions?
Robert, do you have any answers to that?
Well, what I ended my presentation with, first and foremost, you don't want to teach colors. You want to give, and this is what Andreas also mentioned, you want to give a chance to the students to play around, to experience, to explore colors, express themselves. Of course, in the case of art students, you shouldn't give them much theory. In the case of design students, definitely you should teach them what is the difference between additive and subtractive mixing, additive light mixing, and subtractive paint mixing, because one of the things nowadays at university, the first thing the students encounters is that he or she has a computer, creates something, prints it out, and it comes out all different. Why? What should I do about it? This is for designers, I think. This is the most important thing to teach. For architects, they should learn about color in 3D.
Yeah, because that's a completely different ball game. How color behaves in space.
Yeah, but so you cannot say that this is the universal curriculum that has to be taught at secondary or tertiary level, post-secondary level. Depends on who is the professional, which is the area where you want to use color, and you have to provide them with different skills. You know, definitely the way is not to say that, look, if you mix red, yellow, and blue, you will get all the colors. Try it. This is not the way. But in our courses, we always show the Eaton color wheel and tell the students to try and mix the 12 colors from the 3 primaries. We don't teach theory. We say, try it. They do. Well, it doesn't work. You have learned something. You know, so I think for technology, it's a different story again. Industrial application, a whole different ballgame. You have to teach, well, there is color science, there is color engineering, which those
there are
people
color
who are in
systems.
industry, different fields of industry have to know.
Yeah.
They have to learn something completely different. Artists, I think that artists have to be left to their own devices. If they want to know the why, then they have to be taught. The teacher has to know the answers.
Yeah, and there are, of course, many. Andreas.
I can add to this question. Yeah, but the question basically is, when people have been taught this traditional color theory, how do you get them away from it? And this is no big problem. I actually do that sometimes within our own school when the children in the 5th and 6th form have been taught traditional color theory, and I teach them 2 years or 3 years later. I touch the topic of color again. Of course, I get them away quite easily from that because, as I told you, it has nothing to do with their own experience. And when they experience color mixing, they already know that it doesn't work. And they just need the correct answer why it doesn't work. And this is easy to explain. And it's easy to explain that color is something different from paints and where rules apply on the level of psychology, judging the colors itself. by telling them you can say greenish and yellowish and reddish and bluish. This makes them quite clear that there are four psychological primaries which have nothing to do with mixing. And when it comes to mixing, that the rules don't work. You can't get a pure violet from red and blue. This is what they already know. So if you give them the correct explanation, it's quite easy to get them away from traditional color theory.
Good. Yeah. I'd like to hand over. I'd like to give the audience the chance to ask some questions. So, Ingrid, do you have more questions from the chat?
Yeah, we have we have some comments actually on harmony and why we see things as harmonious. We have comments from different people in the audience. So we have I'm going to give you some insights of them, so we maybe can comment on that. So there is Jen Hoskin that is saying that does familiarity create harmony? We see it enough. Do we see it enough? And we sense that it is harmonious. That's a question. Then we have a comment from Jose Caibano. He says that for him, in his view, harmony is not only a matter of personal taste. It can also be defined as a relationship of balance between difference, resemblance, and between variation and constancy. And he also relates to examples of harmonies or its opposite, which are also presented usually in theories as contrast, simultaneous contrast and after images. And they don't depend just on personal preferences. They just happen. And also we have another comment from Bill Hutanen, that is saying that as an artist, have been concentrating on painting, the concept of harmonies or pleasantness relates to what we are used in perceiving in natural scenarios, especially relating to light. And the more different colors the composition has, the stronger the context of each color in it. So what can you comment, Andreas and Robert, about these three different perspectives on color harmony? I want to also ensure everyone we will have a next forum on color harmony and meaning and relationship, but I think it's very, very hot topic. So I would like to give you the possibility to comment on that.
Well, on Jean's question, does familiarity create harmony? That's a very interesting question. And let me take an example from music. Béla Bartók, to be Hungarian, created music in the early 20th century. And I myself disliked it. And having listened to it several times, I'm more accepting now. Familiarity does create a kind of harmony.
Mm-hmm.
I thought his music was very disharmonious. And having listened to it several times, I don't find it so unpleasant anymore. And I'm sure that the same happens with paintings, color combinations. In my childhood, blue and green together was an absolute no-no. You cannot mix green and blue on a t-shirt or a shirt or whatever. And look at today's, we got used to it. We accept it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I delved into this subject a little bit for my doctoral thesis, and I found that very few contemporary artists refer in any way to any kind of theories of harmony. They're not interested in it. They're interested in completely other things. That's just one possibility among so many different ways of using color. Andreas, do you have any ideas? I think we're running out of time in a few minutes.
I mean, when I dealt with the subject in my doctoral thesis as well, I examined all the doctrines of color harmony, all the rules which exist, and tried to group them. What I can say is that there are kind of empirical examinations, which basically all tell the same, that you can't find a standard. And on the other hand, there are many rules from antiquity to the present, which tell which colors are supposed to harmonize with each others. And even within the same groups, the example I gave was assigning colors to music, and then you could to musical tones, and then you could apply the musical harmony rules back to the colors. And this doesn't work because there are so many different assignments. And in the end, it always turns out that a kind of personal taste of the author was turned into a kind of rule in order to make it a kind of standard.
Yeah.
But there is no scientific basis of a general standard which is adopted by everybody.
Yeah.
It's
I
an
have one.
interesting cultural phenomenon, and we can deal with it endlessly. But I think a rule which is accepted and adopted by everybody doesn't exist.
Yeah. And the same goes as Robert pointed out, goes for color and meaning, these kind of ideas about the universal permanent meanings of individual colors that, for example, Eva Heller in her book proposes. And came to my mind this statement by our team member Paul Green Armitage and his colleague Osvaldo da Pos, who made this study about facial expressions, colors, and basic emotions. And they state in this study that, and this is a quote, that emotions are often confused with emotional states, moods, feelings, sensations, perceptions, denotations, connotations, and cognition. So we don't even know what we're talking about when we talk about the meaning of colors, their significances. It's such a mushy, confused, kind of nebulous concept, this whole thing, and I guess it would need quite a bit of study to clarify what is actually meant by this. But this study by Valdez and Mehrabian that Robert mentioned, it goes quite deep into this subject and tries to clarify. But this is just one example of the sort of misconceptions about the language, how the language comes in between color and our understanding of color.
Harold, that is a perfect segue to the fact that we're going to need to close now, and also to remind you that we have an entire series about the misconceptions this year. So as we're all seeing, and many questions and ideas and thoughts about this, it's great that we're going to have more opportunities to really delve into them. So I want to thank you, Robert and Andreas. Thank you so much for sharing your research and ideas with us. I think all of it, the audience will join in in appreciating the time and the effort and the ideas that you gave to us. So thank you so much. Also, thank you to Harold for moderating the conversation, and also Ingrid for moderating the conversation in the chat box. I wanted to also say to everyone, thank you for being here, for being part of our community. It's as we've said it all along here, this whole idea about the color literacy for the 21st century as a movement depends on all of us, and and what we think and how we can bring it out to our peers in our classrooms and bring it forward into the 21st century. So it's very exciting. Before we adjourn, I would like you to stay tuned for the next forum. We don't have the date yet. It will be later in the spring. So the details will be posted on the Color Literacy Project website. So stay tuned to that. We encourage you to visit the website also to learn more about the project, check out previous recordings from the other forums, that are also on the YouTube channel. So with that said, thank you to everyone today. Keep in touch and enjoy your life in color. I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.